Hey everyone, welcome to a special 100th episode of the Neo Marketing Podcast. Today, Pritch and I are going to go deep into expectations, research, and the difference between strategy, goals, objectives, and tactics.
Yahoo.
So stick around for this one. The all-new Open is coming, all new graphics, all new for the 100th episode of the Neo Marketing Podcast, so come right back.
Welcome to the Golden Group Neo Marketing Podcast, a bi-weekly discussion of best practices, latest trends, and modern techniques for professional business communication, including advertising, marketing, digital channels, social media, public relations, and alternative options.
Pritch, good morning. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Kyle. How about yourself?
Fantastic. I'm super excited that this is our 100th episode.
Hard to believe.
Who would have thought?
Yeah, really.
We started this podcast a little bit of experimenting, a little bit of let's see what happens.
Right.
Definitely trying to do what we do, which is talk.
Right.
About marketing, business development, as I smack the mic there, all the things that we do. And then we've gotten great response. We've gotten feedback. We've had special guests. The last episode, I interviewed the guys from Broke Brewing.
Right.
They started their brewery 2 weeks before the pandemic shut down the state of Oklahoma.
Right.
A lot of different topics we covered. We've done 4 separate episodes on COVID-19,
Right.
when we were early, how to pivot, how to adapt, adopt, and pivot, because no one knew exactly what was going to happen, how long this would last. Now into the process of how businesses are taking what they're learning from COVID-19, the changes they made, the updates, the edits to their business,
Right.
and moving themselves forward. And today I want to talk about specifically a client we spent all year with last year, the American Academy of Diplomacy, a big, huge project that we did with them out of DC,
Yep.
your client, and how the project started with the RFP, how we kind of took that RFP and turned it on its head,
Right.
but we did it in order to benefit the client. It had to do some education along the way, got the client on the same page with us, got a much better project out of it, moved their vehicles forward, which was the 2 podcasts that they produce out of Washington.
Right.
And then we did our research, we did our measurements, and then we ended up with a complete successful project. And now we have a case study on our website that you put together proving the process. And more than anything else, it's great to come together with a client or working with your boss, depending
Right.
on what your role is, and finding the thing that's going to work, creating a plan, moving it forward, working through the process. You know, there's unexpected occurrences that happen.
Right.
And then getting out on the other side, whatever your timetable is on this project, whether it's a massive campaign or a something as simple as one episode of a podcast, but achieving the goals, proving it through your measurements, balancing it versus, the research you did, et cetera, and actually moving an organization forward. The last thing you want to do is have actions that simply make the boss happy, or in our case, the client happy, right?
It's what I tell my students all the time. We're counselors. We're not order takers.
That's right. So no matter what the boss of the client is looking for, we have to dig deeper into what the reality of what can be executed, what can be measured, and then how it moves the whole organization forward. Because the marketing team, a PR team, a communications team, they're within an organization. They're just one aspect of how a business is runs, right? There's all kinds of things that go into running a business. Tons of stuff we've talked about plenty of times on multiple podcasts. But when it comes to marketing communications, we have specific roles. There's specific things we need to do to create the sales funnel, create the opportunity for conversion, et cetera, and then measure and adjust along the way. Because no campaign, nothing ever written down on paper executes exactly the way you wrote it down on paper, no matter how brilliant you are. So that was the case here with the American Academy of Diplomacy, right?
Right. And it started with research.
It definitely, absolutely started with research, and research that we went into thinking was going to confirm some of the theories we had. It did some, and then some other things
And
that it
some
moved
surprises.
our approach
different
than we were expecting, right? So as you were in charge of the research process, tell everyone how you started the research process for this project.
Well, secondary research, first of all, had to get up to speed on categories of podcasts. We had to look at what research had been done in the past. You beg, borrow, and steal where you can, right?
Yeah, you steal from the best.
You steal from the best, absolutely. And with that foundation, then we were able to put together a survey. We a quick plug for Qualtrics panels. It was really a great
fantastic
tool.
to work with, for
absolutely. Sure. And through them got 400 qualified responses, which is significant. And as you said, there were some surprises in that. We thought maybe because these are foreign affairs, international affairs podcasts, we thought that how you voted might be, Democrat, Republican.
We definitely thought there might be a political slant to it.
Absolutely. And as it turned out, there was none.
There was also some demographic assumptions we made, gender, age, et cetera,
Right.
too, that were proven wrong through the research as well, right? Which made us adjust our approach.
Yep, absolutely. So many times clients aren't willing to pay for research.
Unfortunately, so more often than not, that's one of the first places they push back is paying for research. And as we have this discussion today, we'll see why that's the wrong approach, right?
Absolutely, because if we had gone forward without having that research, I'm not sure that, number one, we would have had the same success that we did.
I agree completely.
But, number two, we would be just guessing, and our guesses were wrong in some cases.
That's true, right. We'd have made the wrong assumptions.
Yep, absolutely.
Which is also why you work with professionals. So whether it's giving freedom to your marketing team when they're in-house, or when you work with third-party professionals like us, when you hire consultants or outside agencies, you have to listen to their expertise because that's why you put them in that position. And sometimes it's a little painful. Sometimes it costs some money. Sometimes it slows down the process. I find that too. People want to hey, I want this project to start tomorrow. It's like, no. We need to slow down and do this right, and you get a better end result. And that's incumbent on the professionals, the marketing communication professionals, to have those conversations to educate up their client or their boss, right?
Right, and sometimes they're going to hear something that maybe they don't want to hear,
right.
But that's necessary.
Right, because the world of business, there's a lot of things you don't want to hear,
right?
Unfortunately, or we'd all be rich.
Right.
So let me tell you guys a little bit of background on the project itself. So the American Academy of Diplomacy, a nonprofit organization out of Washington, D.C., contacted Pritch. They had an RFP. They have two podcast. The General and the Ambassador is podcast number 1, and the American Diplomat is podcast number 2. And they had great success with that podcast in what I would call their bubble, right? Everyone talks about bubbles these days, right? In the bubble of Washington, D.C., and a little bit up the East Coast into New York City, a lot of that East Coast area where a lot of people were familiar with or worked in or knew people that worked in foreign service.
Right.
But of course, they wanted to reach outside of their bubble to the entire United States to get the most qualified candidates, hopefully and potentially, to consider careers in foreign service.
Right.
And that was the role of the two podcasts.
In particular, they wanted to expand their listenership in the Midwest.
Right. Specifically in the Midwest, where they had zero success up to that point.
A little bit in Chicago, but otherwise it was pretty much flatlined.
Right. So a lot of assumptions again about of course, folks who live and work around D.C. understand these things better than the rest of the country, which is an assumption that a lot of people made, which we found out wasn't necessarily true.
That's entirely true.
But like most RFPs, there was a whole lot of focus in the wrong place. A whole lot of focus on tactics and numbers.
Right.
And no real evaluations to how those numbers would actually benefit the end goal of recruiting and attracting talent to the foreign service.
Yep, absolutely.
So that was one of the first things we had to address was the client, in this case, was looking in the wrong places. They had their focus in the wrong areas, and it seemed what they were asking us to do, or anyone who was going to apply to the RFP, seemed logical. If you have a whole lot of people listening to your podcast, then there's going to create value.
Right.
That's a huge assumption and logic, right?
Well, and as happens many times, the client will tell you what they know, or what they like, which is based on what they know.
True.
And it's up to us as professionals to help them understand that that's not really going to benefit you the way you think it's going to benefit you.
Right. So the key for everyone listening is understanding that there are measurables. There are tactics. But that's the end of the conversation.
Right.
That's not the beginning of the conversation.
Right.
You really got to get up to the, the term, the 30,000 foot level, right? You have to look at what you're trying to achieve overall, big picture.
Yes.
And then you start working down from there more specifically, starting still very broad at goals.
Right.
Right? And we've had this discussion before. We're going to have it again. You guys got to understand the importance between strategy, goals, objectives, tactics, measurements. So here we go. We're going to break them down real quick. You start with a basic strategy, the idea of what you're trying to accomplish, how you're going to do it, who your audience is, the strengths and weaknesses of your organization, all of the things that go into how you run your business, how you do things, your competitors, your position in the market versus them, your primary competition, your secondary competition.
Right.
All of this stuff is where you start thinking about how you're going to achieve something.
Right.
Because if you're not moving the organization forward, if you're not moving your business forward, your nonprofit, your cause, your event, etc., through the eventual tactics that we get to much later.
But that's the fun stuff.
Everyone wants to start there. You have to start with what is it you're trying to achieve, what's the overall strategy of your organization based on the strengths and weaknesses of your organization, the strengths and weaknesses of your competitors, your position in the market factors, all of those great things, right? So you start with strategy. Let me say that one more time. I'm looking right in the camera. Listen to me. Believe me. Start with strategy. Is that where we started our discussion with the American Academy of Diplomacy, was that they had not paid enough attention to their strategy, and we didn't understand them enough because they didn't explain the strategy well.
Right.
So we had a lot of back and forth discussion. They wanted to go right into let's get to work. We wanted to understand where they're coming from, what they were trying to do, and the things that they had going for them that were great, and the things that were holding them back.
Right.
And again, some of them are obvious,
right.
And some of them were assumptions, and some of them they just didn't know, right? You don't know what you don't know.
But this is where the research really came in handy.
Absolutely. It's also a great example of any aspect of running a business, but absolutely in the marketing communication side, you have to, unexpected things are going to happen, and you have to be prepared to adapt, adopt, and adjust to the unexpected, because it always happens.
Right.
It doesn't mean that you're not great at your job. Actually, you can be a monster marketing professional, and you're still going to have unexpected things that happen that you're going to have to adjust to. It's just part of the process.
Right.
So you have an overall plan, you have an overall strategy, but you have to have room within that strategy for adjustments.
Absolutely. And that's measurement along the way, too.
It absolutely is measurement along the way, which will end up on measurement. But part of measurement is also managing expectations.
Yes.
This is another one. I'm going to look in the camera again one more time. If you're in-house marketing or PR, one of the hardest things to do is manage your boss's expectations, because they're your boss and you want them to be happy with you.
Right.
If you run an agency or you do consulting or you're a third party like we are, that's another aspect. It almost becomes part of the sales process, is expectations. The client tells you what their expectations are. Too many times people are afraid to push back on unrealistic expectations because they won't get the work, or if you're in-house, you're afraid you're going to make the boss mad, or they're going to give it to someone else, or they're going to lose confidence in you, maybe even let you go, right? But tell the people what's the downside to not managing expectations.
Right. If you don't manage expectations, you're an order taker.
That's right. You also won't ever reach the expectations set unrealistically.
Right.
And so now you're back into the conversation of, we set goals, you missed them, it must be your fault.
Must be your fault. Absolutely.
Why not head that off before you ever start working?
Right.
And instead create more realistic expectations, educate up your client or your boss about how it happens. And then, you could set goals. There's always stretch goals. There's always better than expected. There's always best case scenarios. But you have to manage the reality of what can happen. If you have a podcast and you have 2 people subscribe to it, you're not going to have 200,000 people subscribe to it in a week.
Right.
Or a month.
Right.
Probably not a year.
Takes a long time to do that,
Unless Joe Rogan comes on your podcast with his 100 million followers that he has to pump you up. These things don't happen overnight, and it has to be a realistic path to how you get from point A to point B, or really point A to point Z.
Right.
That's managing expectations. And that was another big aspect of our project with the American Academy of Diplomacy, was managing their expectations, and then not just telling them, no, you can't do that, it has to be this.
Right.
But having a discussion with them about how we could create more manageable, realistic expectations, and then where the philosophy and the theory and our experience behind that came from in order to get them to agree to it, not us force it upon them.
Right. And to help them understand the efficacy of the approach.
Right.
I mean, you don't know what you don't know.
And all that
sometimes.
matters is a successful completion
Right.
of the campaign or the project or what it is you're trying to do, right? You need to move the needle.
We were on their side all the way
That's right.
along. We wanted as much success for them as they wanted, but
We certainly did.
success needed to be defined a little bit differently.
That's right.
So we did have several conversations about that.
So we tried to manage our expectations by refocusing them on the things that were more impactful for the campaign that they wanted to create for these two podcasts.
Yep. And based on our research and based on our expertise. And thankfully, there was some back and forth, but
Right.
thankfully in the end, they acquiesced. No, they agreed.
We came
with
to
our
a
approach.
common ground, I think, right? Because we did our education part, because we didn't force it upon them or sort of give ultimatums. We worked through the process with them, and that's part of our role as communicators, as professional communicators, is communicating to our clients as well. So same thing. If you're managing clients' expectations, communicate, over-communicate, communicate more and more and more and more. Education, communication, that's the key. If it's a boss, same thing. Talk to your boss. Have conversations. Have multiple conversations. If you know that unexpected things will happen, at some point the boss is going to come back and go, well, I changed my mind, or, I want to go back to where we were last week. You have to continue the process, or else you're going to end up spending a lot of time, money, and effort into something that doesn't actually move the needle and accomplish what you need to accomplish.
Right. Exactly.
And that's the goal. That's the point here to take away from this is all of this process. People sometimes get a little hesitant about too much process. Oh, it's going to slow me down. It's going to cost money. It's going to maybe zap our freedom to be creative. It's actually the exact opposite. The more of this process, the more you get in front of you, the more everyone knows what you're trying to achieve, how you're getting there, and the end results that makes everything better. At the end of the day, if you're in business, it's profitability. If you're a nonprofit, it is in connection with your community.
Donors and volunteers.
Right, exactly. Yep. There's always an end goal and subsets of those goals that have to be achieved in order to be successful.
Absolutely.
So managing expectations by focusing on the most impactful. And impact comes in a lot of different ways. Sometimes it's something that's easy to accomplish.
Right.
Sometimes it's very low cost. Sometimes it's higher cost, but it does actually create better results. And you have to balance all those things out too. Some people want to start with the low-hanging fruit, right? Let's do the easy stuff. Well, it's low-hanging fruit for a reason. Right? Like, it's easy to do, but you also don't really get much bang for your buck there.
Yeah.
And then as you go up the scale of spending time, money, and effort, you should be seeing more impact. And of course, the things that are most impactful are going to require the most from you. And so you have to do almost a mix of all of those things at the same time in order to move any project forward.
Right, exactly.
So that's exactly where it got us to research. We love research. We believe in research. We wholeheartedly commit ourselves to research, and we're not doing any project for any client ever without putting their prerequisite research in. In this case, the research actually very much gave us some security in the approaches we thought would work. It gave us some new direction and some things that could work better than or differently than we expected, managing those unexpected scenarios.
A little course correction.
Right, exactly. And overall really tightened up our strategy walking into how we were going to accomplish this, which then allowed us to set goals. Now we're going to talk about goals, objectives, and tactics. Once you understand the strategy, because you've done the work with the client, with their internal process, with the research, with the competitive analysis, you have all this together, you have all the factors into what will make your campaign work and what will detract, deter, and drag down your campaign. Once you know those two things, you can now set your goals and create all the things that come from the goals, right?
Right.
So step one, those goals are going to be big and broad.
And they're not going to say how, and they're not going to include measurement.
Listen to the master right here. Say that one more time.
They're going to be very broad.
Yes.
And they're not going to have measurement, and they're not going to say how.
That's right.
A goal is an activity to be achieved.
There it is. A big statement that moves you in a direction.
Right.
It's not how. It definitely, absolutely is in what does it cost or what time is involved. But it is the statements that move you in a certain direction. Because after goals comes...
Well, the way I teach it, the next thing is the objectives.
Right.
We have to, and objectives do have measurement. They have a time frame. They have a direction. They have an audience. They have what everybody's heard, SMART, right? Specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and a time frame. It's really important because that's the measurement. If you've got your objectives set up correctly, then it's a relatively simple thing at the end to measure against those objectives.
So we start at the big picture. We start with goals. There's an idea of where we're going, but it's not these specifics. And you could have 1 to 100 goals. I wouldn't have 100 goals. That's probably unrealistic, but you don't have to have just one.
You don't have to have just one.
You can have multiples, but because they're big picture, because the ideas and what you're trying to accomplish are probably, if you have more than one goal, they're kind of crossing each other a little bit of overlap. You can't do too crazy with too many goals.
Right. And typically I see multiple goals when they're aimed at multiple audiences or stakeholders.
Right.
You can incorporate all your stakeholders underneath one goal, given, it's just a function of changing the objective, but some people like to put a goal against a group.
Right. But then you come back. So when you get down from goals, next becomes objectives. There's absolutely multiple objectives per goal.
You have to have 3.
Start with 3 and move forward from there.
Yep. You have to have a goal that raises awareness.
Yes.
I'm sorry, an objective that raises awareness.
Right.
You have to have an objective that changes attitudes. And finally, the gold standard, you have to have an objective that gets to action.
There you go.
So that's how we teach it in the schoolhouse. That's what we did with this particular client. I think it worked out well.
So now we've started with a overall strategy. We've developed goals, which is moving the strategy forward in a general way. Now we've created very specific objectives as to how we're going to reach those goals with these 3 concepts in mind. Now, finally, do you see how far into the process we've got before we start talking about tactics?
Right.
Tactics are execution. Tactics are the things that when people go, let's do Twitter, let's have Facebook ads, let's make a podcast. These are tactics. These are actions that you take in order to achieve the objectives that support the goals.
And you can interject strategy between objectives and tactics, strategies in terms of communication.
I think subsets of the strategy, yes.
Yes. What I'm saying is that those strategies are specific to the communication process.
Yes.
So coalitions, partnerships, having events, a media strategy, a social media strategy.
Right.
It's different from the higher level strategy that you were talking about. But from there, then you go to the tactics, which are the step-by-step pieces to help you achieve that particular strategy.
And it's easy to understand because you've set your goals and objectives.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
Now you get into tactics. So like I said, it's execution. And again, you can have a few goals. Then you have to have multiple objectives per goal, 3 at least, and you can create others as well. Now you've gone even further, and then the flow chart here is definitely splintered off into multiple tactics that support each objective, and each of those objectives that support the goal.
Right.
And they're working at the same time. Sometimes often, if your branding is good and your messaging is correct, often they're delivering the same message just in multiple ways. They're in multiple channels. You're achieving the same things in different segments and moving along the campaign as each of those audiences, each of the channels, each of the tactics themselves almost demand you do.
Right. And you can have the same tactic or same strategy for different pieces. They
Absolutely.
don't all have to be different.
That's right.
In fact, often they are not. They're going to be very
There
similar.
is a lot of taking, because you have this basic concept of what your brand is, what you're trying to accomplish, who your audience is, taking that across the board, and a lot of it more is an adaptation as to the actual communication channel and the actual execution tool itself.
Right, absolutely.
Right. So now, typically, like we said earlier, you don't start there. Everyone wants to start there. Everyone says, "Hey, my business. I need more sales for my business. Should I start a podcast?"
Right.
Wrong.
Right.
Wrong. You see how far we got before we got into tactics, and tactics is where you would talk about podcasts, social media, your website, email marketing, traditional advertising, all of those things. These are tactics. These are execution. This is how far into the process you have to get, backed up by the research.
By the research. And in the schoolhouse, I spend one class period out of 32 over the course of a semester on tactics.
There you go.
That's it.
That's how important it is, because all the other stuff is more important.
Absolutely.
You have to have all the stuff, the rest of it right. You have to understand who you are, the message that you're taking forward, who your audience is, how you're going to reach them, and then you can get into now we're executing. And then, of course, once you start executing, you have to be able to measure.
Right.
What's the point of doing anything if you can't measure if it's effective or not?
Absolutely.
I said earlier, there's going to be things that don't work as well as expected. There are going to be things that work better than expected. There's always aspects of every campaign that you just sort of can't explain or come out of left field, and occasionally something giant like COVID-19 happens and changes everything.
Changes everything.
But you won't know if something is working or not, or overperforming, if you're not measuring.
If you're not measuring, absolutely. And that's incremental over the course of the campaign.
Right. So all of these things are working at the same time. They're working in concert with each other, and you have big picture, the intermediate picture, the quarters, the months, the weeks, the day execution, and the overall measurement moving you forward, allowing you to adjust, keeping the campaign rolling, learning from it. It's a two-way conversation.
Yep.
Your marketing, the reactions from your audience, from your competitors, from the unexpected things that you didn't think would work as well or not, all of that informs you as to how you make those adjustments and move forward. It is a continual part of that research process of always adding the most relevant information to your decision-making process.
Right. Absolutely.
And that's the fun part, is you're making decisions based on data, not guessing, making assumptions, etc.
not your
So
gut.
do you think you're now going to make your boss or your client happy if you can get them into that process?
Right.
So
Yes.
that's why you have to fight like hell at the beginning to make sure that you start in the right way. You don't start at tactics. You start with strategy and goals. You do the research. You commit to the research. You let the research guide the decision making that you create. You work through the structure. You create as much structure as possible in order to get you now into the tactical execution and those measurements, that you can have some freedom to do exactly what you know will work, and some things that you experiment with. It's the 80-20 rule, right? A little 80% should be spot on. This is what the research and the data tells us. We're going to do it. We're going to watch the measurements. The things that are going great, we'll do more of. The things that are not as working as well, we'll either adjust or do less of, and ultimately end up with very effective marketing, communication, advertising, public relations. All of these tactics are very effective because we've done all of this work in this process that will continually build success potential.
Yep. Absolutely.
So it's a mouthful. It's a whole lot, but that's how the real world works.
Right.
And exactly the success that we had for the American Academy of Diplomacy, because we went through the process, we had these discussions with them, we educated them, we didn't force upon them, we also didn't allow them to force us into scenarios we thought wouldn't be the most professional approach, came to a conclusion together as a team, created the goals, created the objectives, created the tactics, worked the strategy, made adjustments along the way, and then ultimately measured everything out, gave them recommendations on how to move forward in 2020. This was 2019 when we were working with this specific client. And then, of course, COVID happened and everything kind of changed everything. But that's where we ended up with a case study on how it worked, because we worked the process, we document along the way, we have the research to back it up, we have the measurements, and at the end of the day, the reason that it's so important that I'm talking to you about it today on this podcast, another one of our longer podcasts, very intentionally, I wanted episode 100 to definitely be,
Right.
and we've got a lot of great feedback on episode 98 that we went almost a whole hour. We're not going an hour today, but I'm trying to give you guys some more specific in-depth analysis of this, because that's where you're going to be successful. That's where you're going to create success for your organization. You're going to make your boss happy, your client happy, by moving that needle, by working through this process. And it's backed up by a real world example. So you guys can go to the website, to thegoldengroup.com. On the success tab, we have case studies. This particular case study, the American Academy of Diplomacy, is number one. We have other case studies there from other clients we've worked with over the years. We're sharing this with you because we want everyone to take those examples we said earlier, steal from the best, right?
Right.
Well, here's your chance to steal from us, because we're going to show you how we pitched, how we position them, how we do the research, what the research told us, how we translated that into goals, objectives, tactics, how we measured it, and how we created an overall successful campaign that wasn't exactly what the client expected moving in, but we reached the overall goal. We did what they intended to do, just not the way they thought it would happen.
Now, the professor in me is going to have to tell you that we've skirted around it. We've talked over it.
Uh-oh, I'm in trouble.
But the last step is the evaluation.
That's right.
So the evaluation is, how well did you do against your objectives? And that was the final piece that helped our client understand that, yeah, this was a successful campaign,
Right.
because we had the metrics we measured after the campaign based on the objectives, and that became kind of our report card.
And in this case, we went to their office, sat there with them, and had to essentially present our report card, if you will. And that's what professionals do.
Yep.
If it goes well, you get to take credit for it. If it doesn't go well, you have to take the blame for it. And again, that's why you have to manage those expectations going in, because at the end of the day, someone's going to say, we spent time, money, and effort on this. Did it do what we needed to do?
Right, and that's that measurement along the way that will help keep you from getting an F on that
Because you got to make those
report card.
adjustments, and you got to do your 80-20. You got to do a little bit of experimentation. Sometimes the experimentation takes off, and something that was unexpected really jumps up.
Yeah.
And again, because the market tells you, the market dictates. It's not because we had a great idea. It's because the market responded well to something. You refocus back on things that work well. This is the process. This is the communication processes. This is marketing. People often, they confuse all these terms. They confuse obviously marketing and advertising, marketing and sales. They confuse strategy, objectives, goals, tactics, all these things. That's why we're laying out for you.
Yep.
But this is the work of marketing. This is the real work before the work, in order for your execution, the actual tactics, to be as effective as possible. Anyone can go out there and just start, I'm going to start tweeting today.
Right.
I'm going to start making videos.
Right.
I'm going to start recording a podcast. You have to have a process in place, or you're just hoping to get lucky, and hope is not a business strategy.
Hope is not a business strategy. Thank you.
It's a terrible business strategy. So that's a lot, folks. I know we crammed a lot in, again, this episode, but it's episode 100. We really wanted to go for it. You can go to the website, go to the Success tab. You can find all of our case studies. Right there it says case studies. Read them, learn from them, take what you like, adapt it to whatever you're working on. If you have questions, if you have comments, if you want to know more about it, hit us up on social media. You can contact us via the website. You can also find us on all the social media channels. And however you found this podcast, there's probably some comments below on podcast or video. So hit us up, ask questions, make comments, give us your feedback, tell us what you like, what you don't like. Let us know what you want to see on the next episode. We'll have more. We're going to do 100 more episodes eventually. So I'm going to wrap up today's episode. That was a whole lot of stuff. Really appreciate you guys tuning in. Make sure you smash that subscribe button. Make a comment below. Leave us a rating and review so more people can find the Neo Marketing Podcast. And until next time, good luck.
Ciao.
This has been the Golden Group Neo Marketing Podcast. Make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Tell a friend, leave a review, and engage with us on social media. Thanks for listening.